crystalline beings aboard the Velian research vessel Harmony's Edge were dying. Their beautiful, glass-like bodies glowed with panic as one by one, their ship's power cores went dark. These aliens had never known real danger before. Their home world was a paradise of gentle breezes and soft light, where nothing harsh ever happened. Captain Veltar stood in the center of his bridge, his transparent form flickering like a broken lamp. His people were creatures of pure elegance, built from what looked like living crystal. They moved like dancers and spoke in voices that sounded like music. But right now, that musical voice was filled with terror. "Send the emergency beacon," he whispered, the words ringing through the ship like wind chimes in a storm. His crew moved with desperate grace, their crystalline fingers dancing over controls that were failing faster than they could repair them. The ship groaned around them. Warning lights flashed in colors that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. The Velians had built their technology to be as elegant as they were. But elegance meant nothing when death was knocking at your door, light years away. In a steel and concrete monitoring station orbiting Earth, Lieutenant Hyen-Woo Kim was having what he thought would be another boring night shift. The young officer sat surrounded by screens, showing the endless chatter of deep space communications. Merchant ships, colony reports, routine military transmissions. Nothing exciting ever happened on the night watch. Then the alien distress signal hit his equipment like a lightning bolt. Hyen-Woo had never heard anything like it before. The signal was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, carrying a note of desperation that needed no translation. His training kicked in immediately. His fingers flew over his console, analyzing the signal, tracking its source, calculating distances and TRAJECTORIES. Within 3 minutes, he had everything he needed. Within 5 minutes, he was on a direct line to Captain Jinho Park. Jinho was a veteran of 20 years in Earth's space navy. He had seen pirates, smugglers, and hostile aliens. He had fought in 3 different wars and pulled off impossible rescues in the Outer Rim. But he had never received a call quite like this one. "Captain, we have an alien distress signal." Hyen-Woo's voice crackled through the communication system. "Unknown species, ship failing, requesting immediate assistance." Jinho was already moving before the transmission ended. He grabbed his uniform jacket and headed for the bridge of his ship, the Iron Will. This was a heavy rescue vessel, built for the kind of missions that regular ships couldn't handle. It was tough, fast, and equipped with enough firepower to handle trouble if rescue turned into combat. "Prepare for emergency jump," Jinho commanded as he stepped onto his bridge. His crew was already at their stations. These were professionals who had trained together for years. They moved like parts of the same machine. "We have civilians in distress," he announced to his crew. The words carried weight. In the Space Navy, there was no higher priority than saving lives. It didn't matter if those lives belonged to humans or aliens they had never seen before. Engineer Soman Lee was already running diagnostics on their jump drive. She was young but brilliant, the kind of person who could fix anything with spare parts and determination. Her screens lit up with data as she analyzed the distress signal's location. "Sir, the readings show they're drifting into the Maelstrom sector," she reported, her voice tight with concern. "Those radiation storms will cook anything organic." The Maelstrom sector was a nightmare region of space, where electromagnetic storms raged constantly. Ships that entered without proper shielding were torn apart by radiation that could kill a human in minutes. For aliens who might be even more fragile, it would be instant death. Jinho's expression hardened. Time was running out for whoever had sent that signal. "Then we'd better hurry," he replied grimly, settling into his captain's chair. "All hands, prepare for combat jump. We're going into hell to pull someone out." The Iron Will powered up its engines, ready to race across the galaxy to save people they had never met. The Iron Will tore through hyperspace like a bullet, covering impossible distances in minutes. When they dropped back into normal space, the crew got their first look at the alien ship that had called for help. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. Where human ships were built like fortresses of steel and armor, this vessel looked like it had been grown rather than constructed. Smooth curves flowed along its hull like frozen water, and sections of it seemed to glow with their own inner light. It was beautiful in a way that took your breath away, but even from a distance, they could see it was dying. Communications Officer Minho Choi adjusted his headset and opened a channel. He had trained for first contact scenarios, but no amount of training could prepare you for the real thing. His voice stayed steady and professional, even though he knew he was about to make history. Unknown vessel, this is the Earth's ship Iron Will. We received your distress call and are here to assist. For a moment, there was only static. Then a voice came through the speakers that made everyone on the bridge stop what they were doing. It was like listening to music, each word ringing like perfectly tuned bells, but underneath the beauty was raw terror. Please, the voice said, and you could hear the desperation. We are dying. Our ship fails. You are the Deathworld species. The question hung in the air like smoke. Everyone in the galaxy had heard stories about Earth and its people. Most species saw humans as monsters from a nightmare world, creatures so tough they could survive anything. The aliens clearly knew those stories, and they were scared. Captain Jinho stepped forward to where the main view screen was flickering to life. When the image cleared, his entire crew went silent. The aliens were beautiful, beyond description. Their bodies looked like they had been carved from living crystal, transparent and shimmering with inner light. They moved with a grace that made dancers look clumsy. Every gesture was perfect, every movement like art in motion. But they were also clearly fragile in a way that was hard to believe. Their limbs were thin as glass rods. Their skin was so transparent, you could see light passing through them. They looked like they might shatter if you spoke too loudly. Medical Officer Yunji Yang ran her scanner over the alien image and her mouth fell open. She turned to Jinho with wide eyes. Captain, their bone density is practically zero. Their muscle mass is almost nothing. How do they even survive their own planet's gravity? Jinho studied the trembling alien captain on his screen. The being's form was pulsing with colors that clearly showed fear. These weren't warriors or explorers. They were scientists, researchers, people who had probably never seen violence in their entire lives. Very carefully, I imagine, Jinho said, quietly. Then he stepped closer to the screen and spoke directly to the alien captain. Veltar, my name is Jinho Park. We're here to help. Prepare your people for rescue operations. The alien captain's crystalline form flickered even brighter with fear. You're kind, he said, his musical voice shaking. The stories say you come from death itself, that your world forged you in fire and pain. Jinho could see his crew around. So-min with her scarred hands from years of working with dangerous machinery. Minho, with the marks on his face from a childhood accident that would have killed most aliens. Yunji with her enhanced immune system that let her survive diseases that wiped out entire populations. The aliens weren't wrong. Earth was a death world, and humans were its survivors. They had been shaped by ice ages and plagues, by predators and disasters. Every human on his ship carried the genes of ancestors who had crawled out of hell and kept fighting. But that wasn't all they were. Today, Jinho said gently, his voice carrying the warmth that only humans seemed capable of, we come as friends. The alien captain's fear didn't disappear, but something else flickered in his crystalline features. Hope. Maybe these Deathworld monsters really had come to save them. Jin-Ho turned to his crew. All right, people. We have scared civilians who need our help. Let's show them what humans do best. His crew smiled. They were about to save some lives. The scanner data that flooded into the Iron Will's computers painted a picture that made even the experienced human crew pause. What they were looking at wasn't just a ship in trouble. It was a ship caught in what could only be described as a cosmic nightmare. The alien vessel was trapped in the gravitational grip of a rogue planetoid, a chunk of rock that had been wandering through space for millions of years. But this wasn't just any dead rock. The planetoid's surface crackled with constant electromagnetic storms that lit up the darkness like an angry god, throwing lightning bolts. Radiation poured off it in waves that would cook most life forms in seconds. Pilot Tae-hyun Yoon studied the tactical display with the focused attention of someone who had flown through asteroid fields and pirate ambushes. What he saw on his screens made him whistle low under his breath. The gravitational distortions are getting worse by the minute, he reported to Captain Jin-ho. That rock is pulling them in like a magnet, and the radiation levels coming off. That thing would kill their crew in minutes of direct exposure. The beautiful alien ship was caught like a butterfly in a spider's web. Every passing second dragged it closer to the planetoid's surface, where the storms raged with the fury of a dozen hurricanes. The crystalline beings aboard that vessel were watching death approach with mathematical precision. Navigation Officer Hyejin Park ran calculation after calculation, her fingers flying over her console as she searched for options. She was known throughout the fleet for finding solutions to impossible problems, but this time, the numbers kept giving her the same answer. "We can't use transporters in this electromagnetic interference," she announced, frustration clear in her voice. "The storms are scrambling every signal we send. Someone has to go over there manually." The bridge went quiet for a moment. Manual rescue meant flying a small pod through radiation storms that could fry electronics and kill a person in minutes. It meant boarding a failing alien ship while electromagnetic pulses tried to tear apart your equipment. It meant working in conditions that most species would consider instantly lethal. Captain Jin-ho stood up from his command chair without hesitation. He moved to the equipment locker and began pulling out his environmental suit, the heavy armor. That would be his only protection against the cosmic hell they were about to enter. "Prep the boarding pod," he ordered calmly, as if he was asking someone to bring him coffee. "So-min, grab your repair kit. We're going to need to fix their ship from the inside." Engineer So-min Lee was already moving, gathering the tools she would need to repair alien technology she had never seen before. Her repair kit contained everything from plasma welders to quantum screwdrivers, but she wasn't sure any of it would work on crystalline technology. Through the communication system, Captain Veltar's voice came again, filled with disbelief, and "Terra, Captain Jin-ho," the alien said, his musical voice shaking like wind chimes in a hurricane. "The conditions near our ship, they would destroy any living thing. The radiation, the electromagnetic storms, the gravitational stress. Even your fearsome species cannot survive such horror." Jin-ho paused in putting on his suit and looked around at his crew. Tae-hyun was already calculating approach vectors through the storm. So-min was testing her equipment to make sure it would function in high radiation. Medical Officer Yoon-ji was preparing emergency medical supplies in case they brought back injured aliens. To the humans, this was dangerous but doable. They had trained for scenarios like this. Their equipment was built to handle extreme conditions. Their bodies were evolved to survive things that would kill most species. But to the aliens watching them, the humans were preparing to walk into certain death to save strangers. Jin-ho sealed his helmet and turned to face the view screen where Veltar waited. "Captain Veltar," he said simply, "we've been to worse places. Hold tight, we're coming to get you." The alien captain's form pulsed with colors that clearly meant amazement. These Deathworld creatures were about to dive into hell itself, and they were treating it like just another day at work. Jin-ho and So-min headed for the boarding pod, ready to prove that sometimes being from a death world was exactly what the galaxy needed. The boarding pod tore through space like a meteor, its hull glowing white-hot from the electromagnetic storms that raged around the dying alien ship. Inside the small craft, Captain Jin-ho and Engineer So-min Lee felt the pod shake and buck as invisible forces tried to tear it apart. Warning lights flashed red across every surface, and the radiation detectors screamed warnings that would have sent most species running for cover, but the humans just gritted their teeth and held on. When the pod finally punched through the worst of the storm and locked onto the alien vessel's docking port, Soman was already grabbing her tools. The moment the airlock cycled open, she stepped into conditions that made her radiation detector go completely silent. Not because the radiation had stopped, but because the levels were so high they had burned out the sensor. The interior of the alien ship was like stepping into a crystal palace. Everything was made of the same translucent material as the aliens themselves, glowing with soft inner light. It was beautiful beyond description, but Soman could see the problem immediately. This technology was built for a perfect world, where nothing ever went wrong. The cargo bay, where the main power couplings were located, felt like being inside a microwave oven. The gravitational forces from the rogue planetoid were so strong that Soman had to brace herself against a wall just to stay upright. The crushing weight would have turned the crystalline aliens into powder in seconds. Back on the Iron Will, Magnetic Dong Hyun-oh monitored the away team's vital signs with growing concern. The readings he was getting didn't make sense. No one should be able to function in those conditions. Radiation levels are spiking beyond our sensor's ability to measure, he reported through the comm system, his voice tight with worry. You're taking a beating out there that would kill most life forms instantly. Soman's voice came back steady and calm, as if she was working in her own garage instead of a radioactive hell. Nothing we can't handle, Doc. Just another day at the office. She was lying on her back under a control panel, her plasma welder throwing sparks as she repaired connections that had been fried by the electromagnetic storms. The radiation washing over her would have cooked the alien crew in seconds. But her environmental suit and enhanced human physiology were designed for exactly these kinds of conditions. Their technology is incredibly delicate, she continued, her voice focused on her work. Beautiful, but definitely not built for emergencies. It's like they never imagined anything could go wrong. Through their ship's failing sensors, the valiant crew watched the human work in conditions their instruments couldn't even properly measure. Their sensors kept displaying error messages because the environmental readings were beyond what they thought was possible for any living creature to survive. Captain Veltar stood on his bridge, his crystalline form flickering with patterns of pure disbelief. Around him, his crew whispered in voices like musical instruments, their words filled with awe and terror. They moved through death itself, as if it were nothing, Veltar said, his voice barely audible. How can any species be so resilient? What kind of world could forge beings like this? Outside the alien ship, Security Chief Soo-Jin Kim floated in space, her suit's thrusters keeping her positioned near the hull. Her job was to watch for debris and other dangers, while Soman worked. The electromagnetic storms were throwing chunks of metal and rock around like bullets, each piece moving fast enough to punch through most ship hulls. Soo-Jin tracked each piece of debris with enhanced reflexes that had been trained through years of combat. Her eyes moved constantly, calculating trajectories and threat levels. When a piece of twisted metal the size of a car came spinning toward Soman's work area, Soo-Jin casually fired her thruster pack and intercepted it with her armored shoulder, deflecting it away from her teammate. To Soo-Jin, this was just routine security work. She had done similar jobs in asteroid fields and combat zones. The radiation that was slowly cooking her despite her suit's protection was just another occupational hazard. But to the aliens watching through their sensors, it looked like witnessing gods at work. These humans were operating in conditions that would instantly destroy any other known species, and they were doing it with the casual competence of people who had been born for exactly this kind of impossible situation. The Velians were beginning to understand why humans were whispered about in fearful legends across the galaxy. They weren't just tough. They were something completely outside the normal rules of biology and survival. The first warning came from the Iron Will's long-range sensors, a pattern of energy signatures that made the ship's computer systems flash urgent alerts across every screen. Communications Officer Minho Choi had been monitoring the rescue operation when the new contacts appeared on his display, like dark omens. His face went from calm professionalism to grim concern as he ran the signal analysis. The energy patterns were unmistakable, and they meant nothing good for anyone in this sector of space. "Captain, we have company incoming," Minho announced, his voice cutting through the bridge chatter. "Hegemony battle group. 12 ships, strong. And judging by their approach, vector, and speed, they're definitely not here to offer assistance." The words hit the bridge like a physical blow. Everyone knew about the hegemony. They were the galaxy's nightmare, a militaristic empire that swept through space like a plague. They didn't negotiate, they didn't show mercy, and they didn't leave survivors who might warn others. Through the communication link with the alien vessel, Captain Veltar's musical voice suddenly filled with a terror that went beyond anything they had heard before. His crystalline form, visible on the view screen, went pale as starlight. "The Ravagers," he whispered, using the name that peaceful species gave to the hegemony forces. "They have found us. We fled their expansion into our home sector, abandoning everything we had built over centuries. They enslave those they find useful and destroy all others. There is no mercy in them." On the bridge of the Iron Will, the human crew exchanged the kind of looks that veterans share when they realize a bad situation has just become potentially deadly. These weren't pirates or smugglers they could scare off with a show of force. The hegemony was a professional military machine that had conquered half the galaxy. Weapons Officer Ji Woo-shin didn't wait for orders. Her hands moved across her control panel with practiced efficiency, bringing the ship's defensive systems online. The Iron Will was a rescue vessel, not a warship, but it had enough firepower to handle most threats. "Charging all weapon systems," she reported calmly. "Shield generators at full power. We're as ready as we're going to get." Captain Jinho stood from his command chair, his mind already running through tactical options. None of them looked particularly good. "How long until they reach us?" he asked Navigation Officer Hyjin Park. Hyjin's fingers flew over her calculations, tracking the approaching fleet's speed and trajectory. 20 minutes at their current velocity, maybe 25 if they slowed down to scan us first. Through the communication system, they could hear the Velians frantically broadcasting on all frequencies. Captain Veltar was trying to surrender his ship, hoping to spare both vessels from destruction. His crew was transmitting every peaceful greeting they knew, offering to submit to hegemony authority without resistance. The response came back in the harsh guttural language of the hegemony. Minho's translation program worked for a few seconds before displaying the message in human text. The words were exactly what everyone expected and feared: unconditional surrender, immediate boarding and inspection. Any resistance would result in the complete destruction of both vessels and the enslavement or execution of all crew members. Jinho looked around at his crew. These were people he had served with for years, men and women who had followed him through impossible situations before. He could see the same thought in all their eyes. They weren't going to abandon the aliens they had come to save. "Opinions?" he asked simply. From the alien ship, Soman's voice came through the comm system without hesitation. "We don't abandon people in need, Captain. That's not who we are." Security Chief Sujin, Kim, still floating outside the alien vessel, added her voice with the same quiet determination. "The Velians are under our protection now. That means something." Around the bridge, Jinho saw nods from every crew member. Pilot Taehan Yoon was already calculating combat maneuvers. Medical Officer Yoonji was preparing for casualties. Communications Officer Minho was setting up encrypted channels in case they needed to call for backup. They were outnumbered 12-1 by professional warships. The smart move, the safe move, would be to withdraw and let the aliens face their fate alone. But that wasn't the human way. Jinho nodded slowly, feeling the weight of command and the pride of serving with people like this. "All hands, battle stations," he announced over the ship's intercom. "Looks like we're doing this the hard way." The Iron Will prepared for war. The hegemony fleet materialized out of hyperspace, like wolves emerging from a dark forest. 12 massive battlecruisers, each one bristling with weapons that had reduced entire planets to ash. Their hulls were scarred from countless victories, painted with the symbols of conquered worlds. This was a force that had never known defeat. Admiral Crix stood on the bridge of his flagship, his reptilian features twisted into what passed for a smile among his species. He had expected to find a crippled research vessel and maybe some primitive rescue craft. Easy prey that would barely slow down his fleet's advance into this sector. Instead, his sensors showed him something that made him pause. The human ship had positioned itself directly between his fleet and the helpless alien vessel, one small rescue craft facing down 12 battlecruisers. It was either the bravest thing he had ever seen, or the most foolish. One small vessel dares challenge the might of 12 battlecruisers. He asked his bridge crew, genuine confusion in his voice. Do these creatures not understand what they face? His tactical officer, a nervous creature with too many eyes, shifted uncomfortably at his post. The intelligence reports about this species had been disturbing. Stories that seemed too wild to believe, even for seasoned warriors who had seen the worst the galaxy had to offer. "Admiral," the tactical officer said carefully, "our intelligence reports classify this species as extremely dangerous. The other races call them Deathworlders. They say nonsense." Admiral Crix cut him off with a dismissive wave. "No single ship can stand against this fleet. Begin the attack. Show them the price of defying the hegemony." But aboard the Iron Will, something was changing. The atmosphere on the bridge had shifted from rescue operations to something much darker and more primal. Captain Jinho stood at the center of it all, and his crew could see that the gentle man who had rushed to save alien civilians was gone. In his place stood something that the hegemony should have taken more seriously. Jinho's expression had hardened into the look of a predator that had just seen a threat to its pack. His eyes held the cold calculation of a species that had fought its way to the top of the food chain on one of the galaxy's most dangerous worlds. Around him, his crew moved with a different kind of efficiency now. Gone was the casual professionalism of a rescue operation. This was the coordinated movement of hunters who had spotted their prey. Every gesture was precise, every action calculated for maximum effect. "Target their lead ship," Jinho ordered, his voice quiet, but carrying the authority of absolute command. "Show them what happens when they threaten those under our protection." Weapons Officer Jiwoo Shin's hands moved over her controls with deadly precision. Her usual cheerful demeanor had been replaced by the focused intensity of someone who had trained for war since childhood. A grim smile played across her lips as she armed the ship's main guns. "Kinetic rounds, loaded and ready, Captain," she reported. "They won't know what hit them." The hegemony fleet had faced energy weapons, plasma cannons, and particle beams in their campaigns across the galaxy. Their shields were designed to deflect or absorb these standard forms of attack, but humans had never been a standard species. When the Iron Will fired its first salvo, the rounds that screamed across space weren't made of energy or exotic particles. They were simple chunks of dense metal, accelerated to incredible velocities by magnetic fields. Raw mass and physics turned into weapons of devastating The kinetic rounds punched through the hegemony flagship's shields like they weren't even there. Energy barriers designed to stop the most advanced weapons in the galaxy meant nothing against simple hunks of metal moving at significant fractions of light speed. The flagship's hull exploded in a shower of debris and atmosphere. Emergency klaxons wailed as Admiral Krex was thrown from his feet by the impact. Half his bridge crew was down, and damage reports flooded in from across his ship. "What was that?" he roared, pulling himself upright. "What kind of weapon?" His tactical officer, bleeding from a dozen cuts, looked up from his damaged console with terror in all of his eyes. "Admiral," he whispered, "they're using kinetic weapons. Simple mass drivers. Our shields can't stop solid matter moving that fast." For the first time in his career, Admiral Krex felt something he had never experienced before: fear. These humans weren't using advanced technology or exotic weapons. They were using the most basic principles of physics, turned into instruments of war with terrifying effectiveness. The single human ship hung in space, like a predator studying its prey, and Admiral Krex suddenly understood why the other races spoke of Deathworlders in whispers. The space battle that erupted around the dying alien ship was unlike anything the hegemony had ever encountered. What they had expected to be a quick slaughter turned into a nightmare that would haunt their military strategists for generations to come. The hegemony fought wars the way most advanced civilizations did, with overwhelming firepower and superior technology. Their tactics were based on mathematical precision, carefully calculated formations, and the assumption that their enemies would behave logically. But humans didn't fight like civilized beings. They fought like the apex predators they had evolved to be. Pilot Tae-Hyun Yoon, through the iron will, into maneuvers that made no sense according to standard space combat doctrine. Instead of maintaining safe distances and trading fire in orderly formations, he sent the ship diving through the hegemony fleet like a shark tearing through a school of fish. He used the gravitational field of the rogue planetoid not as an obstacle to avoid, but as a weapon to redirect his ship's momentum in ways that defied prediction. The iron will would suddenly appear above a hegemony cruiser, strike with devastating kinetic rounds, then use the planet's gravity to slingshot away before the enemy could respond. "Pack Formation Alpha," Captain Jinho commanded, his voice calm even as enemy plasma bolts hammered their shields. The order meant nothing to the aliens listening, but every human on the ship understood it instinctively. It was a hunting pattern, older than civilization, encoded in their DNA from millions of years of coordinated predation. One member of the pack would draw the prey's attention while the others positioned themselves for the killing strike. The human crew didn't just work together. They functioned as a single organism, with one shared purpose. When enemy fire punched through their shields and tore holes in the hull, Engineer Soman continued her repairs, even as sparks flew around her and the air filled with smoke. She worked with the focused intensity of someone who knew that her pack's survival depended on her skills. When an exploding console sent shrapnel into Security Chief Sujin's right arm, she barely paused. Blood ran down her sleeve as she switched her weapon to her left hand and kept firing the ship's defensive guns. The injury that would have sent most species into shock was just another problem to work around through their failing sensors. The Velian crew watched this display of human determination with something approaching religious awe. These creatures were fighting with injuries that would have killed entire crews of crystalline beings, and they weren't just surviving, they were winning. "They do not retreat," Captain Valtar whispered to his crew, his musical voice filled with wonder. "Even facing impossible odds, even bleeding from wounds that should fell them, they stand between us and harm." The electromagnetic storms around the rogue planetoid interfered with communications, but the humans seemed to anticipate each other's actions without needing to speak. When Tae-Hyun began an attack run, Ji-Woo was already charging the weapons. When Soman reported a power fluctuation, the entire crew adjusted their tactics to compensate. They moved like wolves who had hunted together for years, each one knowing exactly what the others would do in any situation. Admiral Krex watched from his damaged flagship as 3 of his battlecruisers fell to the lone human vessel. The Iron Will was taking massive damage, its whole scarred and bleeding atmosphere, but it kept fighting with a ferocity that made no logical sense. "Why don't they withdraw?" his tactical officer asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "Their ship is dying. Any rational species would retreat and preserve their lives." But Admiral Krex was beginning to understand something that chilled him to his core. These humans weren't fighting a rational battle for territory or resources. They were protecting their pack, and that changed everything. He had seen predators before, but never ones that combined intelligence with the killer instincts of natural hunters. The humans had taken the coordination and loyalty of pack animals, and adapted it for warfare among the stars. For the first time in his military career, Admiral Krex considered retreat. His fleet was being systematically destroyed by creatures who refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. The Deathworlders were teaching the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. The silence that followed the battle was almost deafening, where moments before space had been filled with the fury of weapons fire and the screams of dying ships. Now there was only the quiet hum of damaged systems and the distant crackle of electromagnetic storms. 7 of the 12 hegemony battle. Cruisers were gone, their hulks drifting dark and lifeless among the debris. The remaining 5 had fled in complete disorder, their formations shattered and their crews in panic. Admiral Krex had transmitted a desperate warning to Hegemony Command about the Deathworld demons before his damaged flagship jumped to hyperspace, carrying news that would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. The Iron Will hung in space like a wounded predator, its hull scarred with plasma burns and meteor impacts. Atmosphere leaked from a dozen breaches, and entire sections of the ship's armor had been torn away by enemy fire. But it was still there, still functional, still protecting the alien vessel it had come to save. Captain Jinho moved through his ship with the calm efficiency of someone who had been through battles before. He stopped to help Medic Dong treat wounded crew members, then moved on to coordinate damage control teams. His uniform was torn and stained with his own blood from a dozen small injuries, but he kept working as if nothing had happened. To Jinho, this had been a necessary fight, but nothing particularly special. Pirates and hostile aliens were just another occupational hazard in deep space. The fact that they had been outnumbered 12-1 was just bad luck. The important thing was that everyone under his protection had survived. Engineer So Min emerged from the alien ship's cargo bay, her environmental suit blackened by radiation and her face streaked with exhaustion. The crystalline vessel's power systems were finally stable, its elegant technology repaired by human determination and spare parts that had never been designed to work together. Through the communication link, Captain Veltar's voice carried a mixture of gratitude and complete bewilderment. His crystalline form flickered with colors that had no equivalent in human emotion as his ship's systems came back online. "How?" he asked, the single word carrying the weight of everything he had witnessed. "How does your species function in such violence? How do you endure pain that would kill us? How do you fight when victory seems impossible?" Salman looked up from her repair equipment, genuinely confused by the question. She wiped grease from her hands and tried to think of how to explain something that seemed perfectly obvious to her. "Someone was trying to hurt you," she said simply, as if that explained everything. "We couldn't let that happen." But Veltar's musical voice pressed on, filled with the need to understand. "But the cost, your injuries. Your ship is dying. Around you, your crew bleeds from wounds that would destroy entire populations of my people. Why would you sacrifice so much for strangers?" Medic Donghaeano looked up from where he was treating a plasma burn on Pilot Taehyun's shoulder. He paused in his work and shrugged, the gesture somehow managing to convey the entire philosophy of his species. "It's what we do," he said matter-of-factly. "Protect the pack." The simple words hit the Velian crew like a revelation. Through their sensors, they had watched humans fight with injuries that would have been instantly fatal to crystalline beings. They had seen a species that treated mortal danger as a minor inconvenience, and personal sacrifice as a duty so basic it didn't even need to be discussed. Captain Veltar's form pulsed with understanding. These humans weren't just warriors or soldiers. They were something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that had evolved the ability to be devastatingly effective at violence, while retaining the instinct to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Most predator species used their abilities to dominate others. Most peaceful species were helpless against aggression, but humans were something different. They were guardians who happened to be terrifyingly good at warfare. Across the bridge of the Velian ship, the crystalline crew whispered to each other in voices like musical instruments. They had witnessed something that would become legend among the peaceful races of the galaxy. They had seen Deathworlders choose to stand between the innocent and harm. No matter the cost to themselves, the humans finished their repairs and prepared to escort the alien ship to safety, treating the whole incident as just another day's work. But for the Velians, everything had changed. They had found the galaxy's protectors, and those protectors were more terrifying and wonderful than anyone had ever imagined. The journey back to Velian space took 3 weeks, with the Harmony's Edge limping along at reduced speed while its crystalline crew tried to process what they had experienced. The elegant research vessel bore scars from its ordeal, but more importantly, its crew carried something that would change the galaxy forever. Hope. Captain Veltar stood before the Velian High Council, his translucent form flickering with the complex light patterns that conveyed deep emotion among his people. The council chamber was a masterpiece of crystal architecture, its walls singing with harmonious tones as hundreds of crystalline beings gathered to hear his report. Honored Council, Veltar began, his voice carrying across the chamber like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. I stand before you alive because of the Deathworlders. The humans saved us. A ripple of shocked whispers moved through the assembly. Everyone had heard the terrifying legends about the creatures from the Death World called Earth. They were supposed to be monsters, beings so violent and savage that even the hegemony feared them. The stories we have heard are both true and false, Veltar continued, his form pulsing with the colors of absolute conviction. Yes, they are beings forged by violence and hardship beyond our comprehension. Yes, they can fight with a ferocity that defies belief. But they are not the monsters of legend. He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the revelation that would reshape galactic politics. They faced certain death to protect strangers. They bled for us. They stood between us and annihilation without hesitation or hope of reward. They are something far more dangerous to our enemies and precious to their friends than we ever imagined. They are guardians. The news spread through Velian space like wildfire, carried by quantum communicators to every corner of their peaceful civilization. Within days, the story had reached other species who lived in the shadow of hegemony expansion. The aquatic collective, who lived in the ocean worlds of the Spiral Arm, sent urgent messages to their neighbors. The flowering mines, a plant-based species known for their wisdom, began emergency sessions to discuss this development. Even the gentle architects, builders of the galaxy's most beautiful cities, paused in their construction to send delegations, racing toward Earth. They had all been looking for someone to stand between them and the darkness, and suddenly they had found exactly what they needed. Captain Jinho sat in his quarters aboard the Iron Will, staring at a computer screen filled with diplomatic requests. Messages from dozens of species flooded Earth's communication networks, all asking for the same thing: protection, alliance, friendship with the humans who had saved the Velians. We've become the neighborhood watch, Engineer Solman observed with genuine amusement as she read over his shoulder. She had been helping him sort through the messages, trying to figure out which ones were genuine requests and which were just curiosity seekers. Wanting to meet the famous Deathworlders, Security Chief Sujin Kim looked up from where she was methodically, cleaning her sidearm, a ritual she performed after every mission. The weapon had saved their lives during the battle with the hegemony, and she treated it with the respect it deserved. Could be worse jobs, she replied with a slight smile. At least the neighbors seemed grateful. Around them, the rest of the crew went about their normal duties with the same casual competence they had always shown. Pilot Tae Hyun was running diagnostics on the ship's engines. Manek Dong Hyun-oh was updating his medical supplies. Communications Officer Min-ho Choi was establishing secure channels with Earth Command. To them, the battle that had made them legends across the galaxy was just another successful mission. They had saved lives, protected the innocent, and made it home safely. That was what mattered. But back on Earth, government officials were beginning to understand the magnitude of what had happened. Humanity had stumbled into a role they had never sought, but were uniquely qualified to fill. The galaxy's peaceful species needed protectors, and evolution had crafted humans to be exactly that. The Iron Will and its crew had become symbols of something larger than themselves. They represented the best of human nature, the willingness to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves, the instinct to protect the innocent, and the casual heroism that humans displayed when facing impossible odds. Jin-ho closed his computer and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, peaceful civilizations were sleeping safely because they knew that if trouble came, the humans would stand between them and harm. The Deathworlders had found their purpose among the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same.